Everyone said that I was lucky to have married the man who loved me the most in the world. My cousin was unlucky in her marriage and was so jealous of me that she went crazy. She kept nagging that I was ungrateful and didn't deserve such a good husband. Finally, she pushed me down the stairs, and both I and my unborn child died. When I opened my eyes, I went back to the day when my parents introduced me to my husband. My cousin was flirting beside my husband. I clapped my hands and laughed. I decided to give such a husband with an abnormally strong possessiveness and a fragile mind to her. Why were you talking to him? Did he touch you? Was it this hand? Go, wash your hands quickly. Go. Why don't you move? Use soap, use detergent, and scrub with a steel wool ball. Hardy shouted in my ear like a madman, his eyes red and tears streaming down his face. He pulled my hand hard and dragged me forcefully. If it had been the first time I encountered him like this, I might have found it interesting or even touching. But this was already the 6th time he had gone crazy in a day, and I just felt annoyed and angry. Hardy had an extraordinary possessiveness towards me. Just because the intern under me accidentally touched my finger when taking the materials I handed him, Hardy wouldn't let it go and burst into tears, asking me to scrub my hand 20 times with a steel wool ball, or else it meant that I didn't love him. There were countless similar incidents. When I didn't feel well and went to the hospital, Hardy demanded that I must choose a female doctor. However, there were already a limited number of expert numbers. His being so picky made me suffer from the pain for a whole week before I could see a doctor. The doctor said that if I had come a little later, it might have been life-threatening and that I needed an operation now. Hardy turned a deaf ear to it and grabbed a passing nurse and shouted, "You give my wife the injection. Don't let male nurses come over. Find us an empty ward. No men are allowed to approach." There was also the trip last year. When playing water sports by the seaside, I couldn't swim and was too scared to try. Hardy excitedly brought a girl who looked very nervous and shy and laughed triumphantly. "Darling, I specially found a female coach for you. Let her take you to play." I was so stupidly touched at that time. It turned out later that this girl was even a trainee and didn't have the qualification to take people independently at all. It was just that Hardy shouted loudly at the reception desk that he must have a female coach and said that he would take responsibility if anything happened. The people there had no choice but to compromise. Sure enough, I was overturned by a huge wave and fell into the water. The intense sense of suffocation made me panic and call for help. I flailed my hands and feet desperately for help, and once despaired that I was about to die. The tourists not far away noticed my miserable situation and were all ready to save me. Who would have thought that Hardy shouted crazily on the shore, telling these men not to approach his wife and that he would sue whoever touched me? His words deterred some kind-hearted people, who stood there at a loss. Fortunately, there were still some people who didn't take his words to heart and swam hard to pull me out of the water. "Who allowed you to touch my wife? Do you know that you've made her dirty? It's so dirty, so disgusting. I'll sue you. Wait for the compensation." His unreasonable appearance angered the several big brothers who saved me, and soon they got into a fight. It was not until the police arrived that they were separated. These were relatively big incidents, and there were countless trifles in life. Hardy never allowed me to wear shorts or short skirts when going out, didn't allow me to put on makeup, even when the owner of the Sesame Cake shop gave me an extra cake when closing the shop. He would go to the shop owner's door and shout loudly. He checked my mobile phone every day, deleted all my male friends, and even blocked the company's boss. He hung a sign that said, "Hardy's Woman," on each of my backpacks. In his eyes, I wasn't a woman with an independent personality. I was just his wife, his accessory, and no one was allowed to touch me. Once I thought it was love. If it wasn't excessive preference, how could there be such a strong possessiveness? Later, I paid the price of my life to understand. This was not love at all. It was just Hardy's selfish excuse. I also thought about divorcing Hardy. But he always cried and knelt on the ground, saying that he would change, that he just loved me too much, and asked if loving me was also wrong. His tearful appearance moved everyone, including my parents. My parents complained that I was too ungrateful. They said that it was hard to find a man who cared about the family and loved his wife like Hardy nowadays. In their opinion, even if there were some excessive behaviors, they were forgivable. After all, Hardy was good-looking, had a good job, and was well-educated. You're too insatiable. Hardy treats you so well. Would you rather your husband cheat on you and go to another woman's bed and not even look at you? You should also think about whether you've done anything wrong. Do you have to talk to other men? After saying this, my mother seemed to think of something and quickly covered her mouth. She then turned her head awkwardly to look at my cousin's expression. My cousin was unlucky in her marriage. Her husband kept several women outside. It was said that those women went to my cousin's house to show off their power, smashed everything to pieces, and threatened her that if she didn't divorce, they would find someone to kill her whole family. My cousin's parents died early, and she had a relatively close relationship with my family. So she immediately packed her things and hid in my parents' house. My cousin's husband was quite resourceful. He took most of the property even though he had an affair during the marriage. My cousin left the marriage with nothing and even had her child taken away. I originally thought she was a bit pitiful and also thought that what my mother just said would surely hurt my cousin's feelings. I was just about to comfort her. Unexpectedly, my cousin raised her head, stared straight at me, and her eyes were full of resentment and jealousy. I was startled by her expression and was too stunned to speak in time. My cousin, as if stimulated by something, suddenly stood up. She pointed her finger at my forehead, and her spittle even sprayed into my eyes. How could there be a woman like you? Do you love your brother-in-law or not? What a waste of such a good man like your brother-in-law. Why can't good men meet good women? Why did you get such a good deal? She had always been a gentle and weak image and had always spoken softly in my family for so many years. Such a sudden outburst startled everyone. It was still my cousin herself who first realized her loss of composure. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she choked with sobs as she held my hand and cried about how difficult her life had been over the years. As she was talking, she even plopped down on her knees, looking weak and pitiful with red eyes. It was as if the person who had just shouted at me with full force while pointing at my nose wasn't her at all. I sat there awkwardly and comforted her that things would get better and that it was okay even if she got divorced. At least she wouldn't have to put up with that man's bad temper anymore. I felt sorry for her and was about to suggest whether she should find a lawyer and think of some better solutions. Who knew that my cousin suddenly grabbed my hand tightly, tilted her head and looked at me. Sister, what if no man wants me anymore? How can you say it so easily? You have such a loving husband, so of course you don't care about anything. Cousin, it's so unfair. Why is such a good husband yours? Why? You surely don't deserve him either. The world is really unfair. It would be nice if we could change places. I felt a sense of suffocation and really wanted to tell my cousin that my husband wasn't a perfect model husband either. But she didn't give me a chance to speak at all. Instead, she began to cry about how miserable her life was now that she had no source of income. Actually, I didn't believe what she said. Even if she didn't get much property after the divorce, after living a comfortable life for so many years, she wouldn't be unable to survive all of a sudden. However, my parents had already believed her wholeheartedly and felt extremely sorry for her. Mom looked around and insisted that my cousin had become so thin that she hardly looked like herself. She held my hand and said, "You only have this one younger sister, and you grew up together. The place where your dad and I live is too small and it's really inconvenient to have someone stay here. Why don't you take your cousin home to live for a while? At least let her get through this difficult period." They sounded so sincere, as if I would be a heartless bastard if I didn't agree and would be disregarding our sisterly affection for so many years. Looking at the eager eyes of my parents and my cousin, I had no choice but to nod and agree to take my cousin home. However, I never expected that this move would become a death warrant for me. Hardy worked in a research and development technology company. He had a high education and a high income, and he was also very handsome. He really seemed to be a perfect good man. Not to mention that he was so family-oriented and loving to his wife that it was known to everyone. At 6:30 in the evening, when he got off work, he would call me on time to ask where I was. I worked in a design company, and it was normal to work overtime. However, Hardy demanded that I must go home before he got home. Otherwise, he would come to my company. At first, my colleagues joked that my husband really loved me and couldn't bear to be apart from me for a moment. But as time went by, his behavior completely disrupted our normal work order. The leader no longer assigned important tasks to me and tactfully told me that if the position of the director was too stressful for me, I could choose a more leisurely job that allowed me to take care of my family. In this way, I became a marginalized person in the company. The results of my hard work for many years disappeared, and I could only take on some of the simplest and most basic jobs. All this was just because everyone knew that I had a husband who cared about and loved me. He didn't allow me to go on business trips, didn't allow me to work overtime, didn't allow male colleagues in the company to talk to me for more than 2 minutes, and didn't allow male clients to call me. Although he did so many outrageous and absurd things, when my friends, colleagues and family mentioned Hardy, they still used an envious tone. "Lillian, your husband really loves you so much. How could there be a man who loves his wife so much?" And my reluctance and resistance were seen as those of an ungrateful woman in their eyes. From the first day my cousin moved into my house, she said astonishing things. She lowered her posture, wore an apron, and squatted gently beside the sofa, looking at my husband with red eyes. "Brother-in-law, thank you so much for taking me in. Cousin is sometimes too domineering. I know, it doesn't matter. Let me take care of the household chores from now on." I knew that the most perfect wife in Hardy's ideal was like this. She would satisfy his abnormal possessiveness, be obedient and gentle, have no job or social life of her own, and just serve him at home like a maid every day, waiting for him to come home. Seeing that I didn't say anything, my cousin showed a fragile and sad look on her face. She swayed and fell down feebly. She looked on the verge of crying and was extremely pitiful. "Cousin, I'm disturbing the world of you and brother-in-law, but I don't want to do this either. How can I repay you and brother-in-law? I'm willing to do anything." Inexplicably, I was being played by her like this, and it was for a man I didn't even fancy. The world was so magical that I could hardly understand it. I waved my hand and told her to get up quickly and just regard this place as her own home and do whatever she wanted. Hardy didn't say a word throughout the whole process. He only asked me at the end whether I was free to go out tomorrow. Hardy woke me up early in the morning, his face full of joy and excitement. I couldn't help asking him what he was so happy about. Was it a salary increase? He was a bit reluctant and said that I wasn't romantic, that I had never given him any surprises during the years of our marriage. As he was talking, his eyes turned red again as if he was about to cry. I suddenly felt bored. He was always like this, putting me in an awkward position with just a few words. Seeing that I had a straight face and didn't say anything, Hardy put away his act and said softly that it didn't matter. He had already thought of what gift I could give him. It was only when he drove the car to the tattoo parlor that I understood what he was up to. However, before I could refuse, Hardy shocked me with his words first. He was even more shameless than I had imagined. "Lillian, do you love me?" It was the familiar line again, as if I didn't agree to his request, it meant that I didn't love him and was a sinner in this marriage, let down his sincere feelings. I had learned my lesson now and just went along with what he said first. "Of course I love you. You're my husband. How could I not love you? We've been married for so many years. Do you still doubt our feelings for each other?" As if he hadn't expected me to say this suddenly, a crack appeared in the gentle and amiable mask on Hardy's face. He frowned unnaturally. "Lillian, how can you say that? I'll be sad. Our 3rd wedding anniversary is coming soon. I've thought of an excellent gift. How about you get my name tattooed on your body?" Such an absurd request made my eyelids twitch. I could hardly hold back my anger. After taking a deep breath to calm down a bit, I said, "Sure, honey. Then we must get a pair of identical tattoos. You can get my name tattooed on your butt." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Hardy was angered by my words and tried to drag me into the tattoo parlor forcefully. I've always been faithful to you and never flirted with other women. But Lillian, you're so beautiful and there are so many men around you. If I don't put some marks on you, how can I feel at ease? When he got to the sad part, he even lowered his head and wiped his tears. The tattoo artist, who was also a man, empathized with him a lot and kept praising him as a man of loyalty and righteousness. There was an indescribable look of contempt in his eyes when he looked at me. It was as if I were a flighty and promiscuous bad woman. It's useless to argue with him too much now. The most important thing is that I mustn't compromise. If I got his name tattooed on my body, I'd rather die. Honey, tattoos are not allowed in my company. The annual physical examination is coming soon, and it will definitely be found out. Hearing this, Hardy's eyes lit up instead. He put his arm around me affectionately. Isn't that just right? Lillian, don't go to work anymore. Those male colleagues in your company all have ulterior motives towards you. I saw someone sending you coffee last time. Isn't that a hint to you? Just stay at home, and I'll earn money to support you. People in the tattoo parlor all joined in the fun, clapping and shouting, "Promise him! Promise him!" I couldn't bear it anymore and pushed Hardy away hard. I couldn't take it anymore. This time, I'll divorce him no matter what. Whoever wants a man like this can have him. Perhaps my face looked too gloomy when I got home. My cousin could tell at a glance that the atmosphere between Hardy and me was not right. She took the initiative to bring over a glass of wine, knelt down halfway and handed it to Hardy, asking him softly if he was tired from work. Brother-in-law, don't take it to heart with cousin. She's always like this. All right, with just a few words from her, she convicted me without even asking about the whole story. I was also angry and amused. I turned around and asked her why she didn't bring me a glass of wine too. My cousin seemed to be startled by me. She widened her eyes, looking pitiful, and her speech became stammering with a crying tone. Sorry, cousin. It's my negligence. It's all my fault. Please don't be angry. Hardy gave me an unhappy look and told me not to vent my anger on others. If I had any dissatisfaction, I should tell him directly. I was just about to have a good argument with him and mention the divorce at the same time. Unexpectedly, my cousin suddenly covered her face and burst into tears, shouting vaguely, "Cousin didn't mean it. Brother-in-law, don't be angry. Cousin surely didn't really want to be with that man. She just wanted to get your attention." I was confused by her inexplicable words. What man? What being together? What was she talking about? However, Hardy, with his extremely possessive nature, keenly caught the key words and hurriedly and loudly questioned my cousin about what man had been flirting with me. My cousin began to speak while sobbing. I didn't mean it. Cousin, please don't blame me. I really didn't mean to look at your phone on purpose. That day when your phone rang, I wanted to answer it for you first, but then he suddenly hung up. She bit her lip hesitantly, looked up at my expression, deliberately creating suspense and making people impatient. Sure enough, Hardy got anxious and paced around in place like a furious beast. I just saw someone leaving a message for cousin, saying something like, "Beauty," and an address. This was pure nonsense. I was so angry that I immediately rushed forward to grab my cousin's arm and questioned her why she made up rumors. When had I ever done such a thing? Hardy ran into the room, took out my phone and threw it hard against the wall with all his strength. You shameless woman! You're flirting with other men behind my back. From now on, you're not allowed to go out even one step. Being burdened with such an unfounded accusation, I was also extremely angry. Hardy was simply a madman. A lunatic. Divorce? Let's get divorced right now. I didn't want to stay in the same room with him anymore. I picked up my backpack and wanted to leave first. Hardy grabbed me from behind. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked very scary. Why are you leaving? You're my woman. Where are you going? Are you going out to flirt with men? Who is it? Is it your boss? Or your college classmate? We were tugging and pulling at each other at the staircase entrance. Suddenly, my cousin rushed over from behind. At this moment, her hair was disheveled, there was a crazy look in her eyes, and she was muttering to herself, You don't deserve such a good man. Go to hell. Go to hell. Once you're dead, he'll be mine. I was already standing by the staircase. Being bumped by my cousin so suddenly, I lost my balance and fell straight down, rolling down the stairs. The intense pain all over my body made it difficult for me to breathe. I tried my best to shout, "Help," in a weak voice, but neither Hardy nor my cousin took any action. They looked at each other and saw the same fear in each other's eyes. My cousin screamed first. She pointed at me, who was curled up in a ball, with trembling fingers. "So much blood. There's so much blood." I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen and blood was flowing out from between my legs. "The child. I was pregnant, Lillian, this is Hardy. Look, he's such a handsome guy." Hearing the familiar voice, I suddenly opened my eyes. "Lillian, this is Hardy. Look, he's such a handsome guy." Hearing the familiar voice, I suddenly opened my eyes. What came into view were my parents' smiling faces, Hardy sitting opposite me looking serious, and my cousin who was flirting and trying to lean her body on Hardy's shoulder. I was reincarnated and went back to the day when Hardy and I met on our first blind date. I saw the hostile and complacent look in my cousin's eyes. I understood that she also had her memories. Since my cousin liked Hardy, this madman with an abnormally strong possessiveness, so much, I'd just give him to her. "Dad, Mom, I've just started my career. It's really not appropriate to talk about getting married now." I looked at my cousin, who was full of eagerness, and then changed the topic and gave her a faint smile. "My cousin's parents passed away early. She's all alone and helpless. As her elder sister, I've always been thinking about her. Why don't we let my cousin get to know Mr. Hardy? I think they match each other very well. One is a green tea and white lotus, and the other is a crazy lunatic. In this life, I'm curious to see what kind of good life you two can live." My cousin couldn't believe that I would give Hardy away. She sneaked up to me and said in a voice that only the two of us could hear, "Cousin, what trick are you playing?" I pretended to be surprised and looked at her, raised my hand to touch her forehead and smeared the powder on my hand onto her dress by the way. "Cousin, what are you talking about? What trick? Is the food not to your taste?" Although my cousin still had doubts about me, she really didn't want to let go of Hardy, this attractive man. In less than a month, their wedding date was set. I was working overtime in the company when I received their wedding invitation. Without Hardy's obstruction and entanglement, I got promoted smoothly in the company this time. Thinking of the wedding, I couldn't help shivering. In my previous life, Hardy didn't allow me to wear a wedding dress or high heels because there would be exposed skin that others could see. But at that time, I had a tough attitude, and he didn't dare to be too presumptuous with me at first, for fear of scaring away the prey he had got, so in the end, I still had a normal wedding. But this time, my cousin was so afraid that Hardy would leave her that she would surely be obedient and everything. Sure enough, the wedding was unexpected from the very beginning. My cousin didn't wear a wedding dress or makeup, instead, she wore a shabby and old down jacket. It was the middle of August in midsummer. Even though the air conditioner was on in the lobby, it was still sweltering. My cousin looked as if she had just been fished out of the water, all greasy and limp. When she saw me, she raised her head haughtily and snorted, clinging tightly to Hardy's arm as if she was afraid that I would snatch him away. Apart from the overwhelming hatred in my heart, all that was left was a sense of absurdity. A few minutes later, the music started, but there was a commotion coming from the stage. I went closer to take a look and almost died of laughter. Both of my cousin's parents had passed away early. According to custom, it should be my uncle who took the place of her father and walked her down the aisle holding her hand. But Hardy insisted that my uncle put on a floral glove, saying that men and women should avoid physical contact. My uncle had never suffered such an insult before. It was almost like Hardy was pointing at his face and scolding him for being disrespectful and a bad person. He angrily roared at my cousin, "Where have I ever treated you badly? Since that's the case, don't ever come to see me again from now on. Just pretend that I'm not your uncle." The relatives were all shocked by this scene and started pointing fingers and talking about it. Some people wanted to smooth things over, but Hardy pushed them away instead, asking them to keep a safe distance from my cousin. This was like pouring cold water into hot oil, and the wedding venue turned into a chaotic marketplace. I saw my cousin lowering her head, her face full of humiliation and fear, with tears streaming down her cheeks nonstop. Since she had chosen Hardy, what was this little grievance compared to that? The good show was yet to come. I was at home, enjoying the air conditioner, watching TV and eating watermelon when there was a rapid knock on the door. "Who is it?" I leaned casually against the wall and heard my cousin's panicked cry for help. "Cousin, cousin. You're at home. Open the door, open it quickly and let me in." I looked through the peephole and saw my cousin with disheveled hair and messy clothes, her eyes wide open as if they were about to pop out. "What's the matter, cousin? What happened to you? Why are you in such a hurry?" The more leisurely I was, the more impatient my cousin became. She almost knelt down and begged me to open the door, and her fingernails scratched against the door frame, making a harsh sound. I opened the door and asked her coldly with my arms folded what exactly was going on. My cousin plopped down on the ground, hugged my left leg tightly and looked up at me, begging me to save her. "Hardy is a madman. Cousin, he's a madman. How did you put up with him for so many years?" I pretended to be suspicious and looked down. "What do you mean by so many years? I don't know him." Realizing that she had let something slip, my cousin hurriedly avoided my gaze and cried as she told me about Hardy's evil deeds. "He said he wanted to check if I was a virgin. He. My cousin just kept crying and couldn't speak clearly. I snorted coldly and told her to leave if she didn't want to talk. He even asked me to call every man in my phone and ask them if they had slept with me. When I refused, he wanted to hit me. Hardy was just like that. He even called my high school teacher at that time, a retired old man, and asked him if he had any improper thoughts about me. Since then, I became famous among my high school classmates and no one ever invited me to class reunions again." I smiled and helped my cousin up, pretending to comfort her insincerely. "Mr. Hardy did this because he loves you. He cares about you deeply. What a deep love it is. How can you be dissatisfied? Besides, if you haven't done anything to let Mr. Hardy down, what's wrong with just asking?" My cousin stared at me blankly, muttering something under her breath. After a while, it was as if she had successfully brainwashed herself. She nodded heavily. "He loves me. He loves me. Il listen to him." I thought maliciously that actually Hardy wasn't a very loyal person. I had even suspected that he was cheating before. There were the pretty interns in his office and the lipstick marks on his clothes. With my cousin's crazy personality, if she knew that Hardy had done something wrong to her, she definitely wouldn't let it go. Then when they fought with each other, it would really be a good show. From that day on, I started to collect all kinds of deeds about Hardy. With the experiences from my previous life, everything seemed much easier. And I really found quite a lot of interesting evidence. Hardy graduated from a well-known university in China, but when I searched on the official website, I couldn't find his graduation information no matter what. After a careful search, I found a serious disciplinary record within the school. It clearly stated that Hardy was expelled from school for violating laws and disciplines. I tried every means to get in touch with his classmates from that year and piece together the cause and process of the incident. It turned out that he had a girlfriend at school at that time. Because the girl had a chat with a male classmate for a couple of sentences, he beat that boy into a disabled state. It was said that the classmates who tried to stop him were also injured by Hardy. His family paid a large sum of money to avoid going to prison, but the expulsion from school couldn't be changed. Great. I'll make Hardy pay for all the evil deeds he had done before. I asked someone to check and found that Hardy's current graduation certificate was indeed forged at a high cost. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been qualified to enter this large company. The first thing I wanted to do was to write a letter of complaint to the company to report the employee's false academic qualifications. The company was very efficient. In less than a week, my cousin came to my house crying. How could Hardy be fired? What false academic qualifications? I think someone was just jealous of his talent and wanted to frame him. Who is so evil? My parents were comforting her beside her, but there was a bit of relief in their eyes. Fortunately, they didn't really let me marry Hardy. I found it funny when I saw this and asked my cousin directly what her plan was for coming to my house. She wiped her tears hesitantly and asked if we could lend her some money. Borrow money? Cousin, you know how many years I've been working. I just bought a house with a loan and still owe hundreds of thousands of yuan in total. My cousin wouldn't let it go and her eyes rolled around. Cousin, why don't you sell your house? Anyway, you can live at home. Just help me out in this emergency first. Besides, aunt and uncle can also give you money. I don't have parents anymore. What else can I do? It was really shameless of her to say such bold words. Even my parents, who had always been fond of her, showed unhappy expressions. Although I didn't have money to lend to my cousin, I gave her another idea. Sister doesn't have money, but aren't there many rich people outside? You can borrow some from them first and pay it back quickly later. My cousin hesitated and didn't say anything, but I could see that she was already wavering. Hardy had lost his job, and they still had to pay the mortgage for their wedding house. Life wasn't going to be easy for them. Suddenly, my cousin's cell phone rang. She visibly tensed up and quickly answered the call. It was Hardy's familiar voice on the other end. Where are you? Why aren't you at home? Send me your location. Who's beside you? My cousin stammered and said that she was at her cousin's house. Hardy wouldn't let it go. Is your cousin's father at home? How did you get there? Was the taxi driver male or female? My cousin begged him in a low voice to stop asking and repeatedly promised that she would be home in 10 minutes. My parents, who had heard the whole conversation, looked at each other in surprise. Especially my father, his face was very gloomy. He asked my cousin what Hardy meant by this and even suspected their own relatives. Did he really think he was such a hot commodity? My cousin blushed with shame, her eyes turned red, and she left in great embarrassment. I was originally waiting to see my cousin suffer the consequences of being unable to repay the usury, but unexpectedly, Hardy got into trouble first. My cousin called us, crying bitterly and speaking in a feeble tone, begging us to go to the hospital. When we arrived, the doctor informed us that my cousin had a miscarriage due to external impact and might have great difficulty having children in the future. At that moment, I really felt that all of this was retribution from heaven. Cause and effect go in a cycle. It was only right. When my cousin woke up and heard that she had lost her child, she looked terribly pale, as if she had suffered a huge blow. I asked her what had happened. After hesitating for a long time, she finally said, I went to borrow money. When it was time to repay the debt at the end of the month, they urged me on the phone. Hardy insisted that I was flirting with someone outside and having an improper relationship. He cursed me as a shameless woman. We had a quarrel, and he pushed me, and then I fell down. What about Hardy? My mother asked eagerly. Although my cousin was good for nothing, seeing her in such a state, my mother still couldn't bear it after all. He went to find the moneylenders. They thought he was defaulting on his debt, so they got into a fight, and he had 2 fingers cut off. Saying that, my cousin covered her face and burst into bitter tears. She also kept pounding on herself and shouting loudly, It's all my fault that Hardy got into trouble. It's all my fault. If it weren't for me, Hardy wouldn't have had an accident. I deserve to die. I looked at my cousin with some pity. She had been completely brainwashed by Hardy and was still speaking up for him even now. Hardy became disabled and was detained for half a month for a fray. When we met again, he looked much haggard. He used to be quite handsome and elegant, but now he looked emaciated and had a faintly gloomy and ominous air about him. My cousin had just lost her child and was still very weak, but she was still fussing over Hardy and asking him if he was comfortable. When we entered the door, Hardy was pinching my cousin's neck and asking her why she went to the same supermarket to buy vegetables every day. Do you like that, cashier? Or are you having a secret meeting with your lover every day? Don't try to fool me like I'm a fool. My cousin was breathing with difficulty but still managed to force a flattering smile. Hardy, I know you love me, and I love you too. I love you the most. I won't betray you. Don't worry, Hardy. You'd better stay at home obediently from now on and not see anyone. When Hardy saw us, a flash of hostility appeared in his eyes, and he asked us what we were doing there. I really wanted to say that of course we came to see your jokes. But reason made me put on a concerned look and ask my cousin a lot of questions about how she was feeling. I had already found evidence that Hardy had an ambiguous relationship with his female secretary. I just needed the right moment to let my cousin see it. After Hardy lost his job and had no source of income, that female secretary naturally didn't want to follow him anymore. With his possessive personality, how could he tolerate being abandoned by a woman? Therefore, Hardy kept sending messages to the female secretary from time to time, threatening her that if she didn't come back to him, he would expose everything between them. Hardy even said that he had a video of the two of them. The girl was so panicked that she didn't know what to do. I took the initiative to get in touch with her and got the chat records. Now all I needed was to let my cousin see the video and the chat records, and everything would be fine. Oh. What's this? Cousin, I accidentally turned on the computer. I shouted at the top of my voice. My parents and my cousin all came over when they heard the noise. Waiting for them was a video of people being naked, and ambiguous sounds were floating in the air. I turned around and saw my cousin's blank expression. She couldn't believe it and rushed out to question Hardy. Didn't you say you loved me? Didn't you say you'd be loyal? What do you mean by this? Seeing that the matter had been exposed, Hardy no longer hid it. Loyalty? It's you who should be loyal to me. I can do whatever I want. Is it your place to interfere? My cousin stared at Hardy blankly for a few seconds, then suddenly screamed and turned around and ran into the kitchen. When she came out again, she was holding a big machete high in her hand. My parents saw this and immediately wanted to step forward to stop her, but I held them tightly. It's dangerous. Don't go. Call the police. Hardy, whose injuries hadn't healed yet, was really pinned down on the ground by the extremely angry cousin. She was waving the machete in her hand crazily, and blood splashed on her face. How dare you lie to me? Bitch. Why did you lie to me? How dare you not love me? I felt nauseous and dragged my parents into the room, locked the door and pushed against it firmly. My cousin hated me to the bone. After dealing with Hardy, she would surely come to me. Fortunately, I had called the police in advance, and the police came very quickly. The sound of the police siren was already ringing outside. I only pushed the door open when I heard the sound of my cousin being subdued while screaming. Hardy was dead. He was hacked to death by my cousin. The facts of the crime were clear, and my cousin was sentenced to life imprisonment. In the courtroom, she kept shouting my name, saying that I was the one who should die and that Hardy was my husband. But everyone thought she was a madwoman, and how could the words of a madwoman be taken seriously? Soon, I got an opportunity to study abroad for further education. The company thought highly of me and let me study while still getting paid. This was a good opportunity to leave this place. I didn't have too many attachments to this place anyway. Although my parents didn't harm me directly, when I was suffering terribly in my previous life, they chose to believe Hardy, who had no blood relationship with us. On the contrary, they repeatedly advised me that since I was already married, I should be more understanding. In fact, they hadn't failed to notice something wrong with Hardy. They just thought it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. If I got divorced, they would inevitably lose face in front of relatives and friends. So now, I just want to live my life well. As for other people and other things, I don't care and don't give a damn. The end.